Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a leadership consultant, a keynote speaker, and an author. Valerie Cockrell has worked in senior roles for Disney in France and Florida. She is the author of Manage Like a Mother, Leadership Lessons from the Wisdom of Mom. Valerie's also a mom of 3, and she joins us today from Sydney, Australia. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lianne. I'm very excited to be here and share some of my experience with your audience.
And to me, it's a very exciting topic when we're talking about leadership. So to set the table for our conversation, Valerie, I wonder if you could define leadership as you see it.
Well, I tell you, there's an analogy that I use a lot when I do workshop with organization. And I always say, being a leader means that you have to, it's like going on a journey. You're taking a group of people on a journey. So you have to figure out the destination. You know, where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? Then you have to decide how you're going to get there, the itinerary, right? Are we going to be driving aggressively? Are we going to be cutting corners? Are we looking for shortcuts? Or are we taking the scenic road? Being very careful and mindful in our approach, ethical in our approach, you know. So it's kind of the values, if you will. So this is, you know, very important part of leadership, establishing the how we're going to get to that destination. And then there's the car, you know, the what kind of car we going to drive, what kind of resources are we going to have, what kind of skills, what kind of talents do we need, what kind of processes are we going to put in place. And then the fourth element, which is probably, you know, the most important, it's the fuel. The leader needs to fill up the tank, you know, encourage people, set expectations, coach them when needed. You know, every so often you need to add some air in your tires. So it's kind of the same idea. So I often use this analogy because I think it covers the 4 bases of leadership: the destination, you know, where we're going, how we're going to get there, what tools, you know, the resources we're going to need, and then everything that comes around it with the recognition and coaching and expectations.
It is such a relatable way that you describe it when you use that analogy, and really simplifies what may be a complex concept for some people, and especially young leaders. You've had several leadership positions, as we sort of highlighted at the beginning. Could you provide us a bit of an overview of your background in terms of the leadership roles that you've held over the course of your career?
Right. Well, I'm sure the audience has picked up on my accent already. So born and raised in France, and the reason why I start with this is because my career started from, you know, a point where I was just curious about the world. And I realized if I wanted to discover the world, I had to learn English. So that was the first thing. I moved to London, lived in London for 18 months, learned English. And then that led me to a job working for Disney for 1 year. In Epcot at Walt Disney World, went back to France, worked in banking. Actually, I was an investment advisor. And from there, I actually got rehired by Disney for the opening of Disneyland Paris, worked in retail, started managing 1 store, 2 stores, 3 stores, 5 stores, eventually relocated to Walt Disney World in Orlando, took over Epcot retail merchandise, eventually the Disney Cruise Line also. And then I took a break to raise my 3 children and came back to Disney working for Disney Institute. And for those who do not know what Disney Institute is, it is the outside external training arm of the Disney organization. So you work with outside companies and you help them and provide advisory services to them. It's not they don't like to call it consulting, but so I did a lot of that in the US and in Canada, quite a bit. In California, in Orlando. And then in 2018, I left Disney and I went from the corporate world to being an entrepreneur. My husband and I, we started a consulting company, and we did this for about 6 years. And now my husband has moved on to other jobs and I continue as a one-woman show. But here's the thing about my career. When I look back, it is the variety of roles, the variety of environments that I found myself into. I found myself an individual contributor as a consultant, and also as a team leader in retail. I found myself doing some very inward-looking function as an author, and also very outward-looking functions as a consultant, and also working for Disney Institute. So there is, this variety of thing, I think, has made it, first provided me with a lot of experience, but also the variety has taught me that a career is never linear, right? And I often share that with people because I think that's what makes it interesting and valuable, beyond the titles and the statuses that you may have, or the name titles that are on the door of your office. And I love this. And I worked in France and the US and Australia and Brazil and just about everywhere. So this has been really a whirlwind journey, to say the least.
Well, and when I listen to that story and all of the different experiences that you have, clearly somebody who embraces and relishes change. And the one thing I think we can agree on, if we're looking at, leadership and parenting, is that change is built in, whether you want it or not, right? Ages and stages, et cetera, et cetera. So how did your professional experience and all the different leadership roles you've had impact your role as a mother?
I think the main thing was, as a leader, no matter how many books you read, how many people you listen to, how long you've studied, you're always learning. There's never a moment where you can say, I'm prepared, I've got all the experience I need, all the tools I need, all the skills I need. This is it. I've arrived. It's like I said, it's you taking a trip with a group of people. In the work environment is with your team members, and at home is with your kids. And there, at no moment in time can you be fully prepared to what's going to come around the corner. And you have 3 children, I have 3 children. And when you know that, the first one comes around, and then you think you know how to do this. And then your second child shows up and suddenly has a totally different personality, and you need to handle things very differently. And the third one shows up, and yet again, you have to, change things and consider different things. So that's the similarity between the two. So going back and forth between being a leader and being a parent, I think you learn to adapt, and you learn that you have to learn. You have to keep learning, because there is something new that is bound to, that is lurking around the corner, some scenario, some situation that you're not quite prepared for. And that's what makes it interesting, keeps you on your toes.
It does, definitely. And it's almost like you lived with us, Valerie. When you described those 3 kids, they could not be more different, certainly. It's so interesting because many parents wouldn't automatically see themselves as leaders in their household or use that word in any way to define what they do in terms of raising their kids. So how do you go about sort of helping to define leadership in the context of parenting?
I think, when you're a leader, you are responsible and accountable to and for people. And when you're a parent, you are responsible and accountable to and for your children. And, this is the similarity. You suddenly, it's not about yourself, it's about, your behavior and how it's going to impact the people around you. One thing that is, very true in leadership as much as it is in parenting is the fact that, whether it is your team leaders or your kids, they're watching you. They watch you, they hear you, they remember everything you say, and they absorb it one way or another. And that I always tell people, I said, your team leaders, but your team members at work, there's good news and bad news. The good news is they look up to you and they emulate you. The bad news is they look up to you and they emulate you, right? And it's the same with your kids. Mm-hmm. So you can tell your kids to drive safely, the day where they get to be 15, 16 years old, and it's the time for them to start learning how to drive, and you tell them how important it is to slow down and wear your seatbelt and not get distracted. But let me tell you, if you fail to do it, and maybe when they were 10 years old, you were suddenly looking at your phone at the traffic light, and I'm guilty for one. And my kids, once a teenager, never failed to remind me, Mom, you would check your phone. I've seen you check your phone in the car and that's where you lose your credibility. Same thing as a leader. You can tell people in your organization, safety is very important. We need to slow down. We need to be careful. And then you drive your car at, 50 kilometers an hour, or, 35 miles an hour into the parking lot. Somebody's bound to see you. What are they thinking at this moment? Well, safety maybe is not such an important thing after all, because this is what they do. So I think, to me, the biggest similarity between the two is the fact that you're a role model 24/7. And they will remind you, and especially teenagers, they will never fail to remind you when you've not behaved according to your principle and you have not practiced what you preach.
And it usually happens when you think they're not paying attention, and they are.
Exactly.
They're giving you every sign that indicates I'm not paying attention, except they are. So on that note, Valerie, role modeling, so incredibly important. Are there any leadership skills that come naturally to parents that you believe, can be leveraged inside the home, but also in the workplace?
Yeah. Some are obvious ones, there's, and the reason why I wrote that book, by the way, is because I really wanted to demonstrate for a lot of young women and young mothers that staying home with your kids does not set you back in your career. In fact, it allows you to practice some of the skills that you will be able to leverage in the workplace, and vice versa, right? So there are the obvious ones. Training, right? What do mothers do? They train their kids. And when you train your children, you show empathy, you show patience, you adapt to your child. And think about how you teach a toddler how to walk. You hold the baby's hand, and the baby will take a couple of steps, and then one day you feel that maybe the baby has the right balance, so you let go of the hand, and the baby's going to take 2 steps, and what is he going to do? He's going to fall on his rear end, right? What do you do as a mother at this very moment? You don't tell the child, what is wrong with you? You're a year old. You should be walking by now. Of course not. You say, hey, good job. That was great. Let's try again. And then you hold their hands again. So naturally, as a mother, as a parent, you have this patience. You adapt to the kids' pace. And if they don't walk when they're a year old, you're going to wait until they're 13 months or 14 months, or maybe they'll crawl a little longer. So you have that patience with your kids. Apply that same flexibility and that same patience in the workplace. The second one is setting expectation. As a parent, you always set expectation for your kids, and you know to be very precise. Because if you tell your teenagers, don't come home too late, the joke is on you, because a teenager may think that too late, coming home not too late, maybe 1 a.m. For you, not too late, maybe 10 p.m. But you have failed to specify this. Then it's your problem. Well, as a leader, it's the same thing. Often we're in a hurry and we do not set expectation very clearly. And then the third one for me, the obvious one, is coaching. Discipline. When you discipline your kids, you don't wait for the end of the year to have a performance evaluation, right? You don't say, hey, you did not behave this year, you're not going to get any Christmas for presents, no presents for Christmas, sorry. But same in the workplace, we tend to delay. We don't like coaching people. We don't like disciplining. So we tend to wait. And then when we wait, things get somewhat fuzzy. So, practice that at work. You see somebody who's doing something wrong, tell them right away. And don't be shy about it, because as a parent, you're not shy about coaching your kids. Why? Because you love them unconditionally and you want the best for them. And think about that. If you're a leader and you approach coaching and, with that idea in mind, that you're there to give them a gift, you're them to, I'm here to help you make the best team member, the best performer you can be. it's an entirely different approach. You want the best for them. It's a gift. So I think for me, those three are obvious things that we do instinctively, naturally at home with our kids, and we should leverage in the workplace. And that's why I think parents and mothers specifically are uniquely prepared to take on leadership responsibilities.
Now, you lived this, right? You talked about being a stay-at-home mother, and I believe you did it on two separate occasions, one of which was quite a lengthy period of time, if I recall. What did you learn in that experience with your kids 24/7 that when you returned to the workplace, you thought, wow, you know what? This is just a transferable skill that I never thought about taking from home to work, but here we are, and it's working for me.
I think probably what I alluded to earlier on, that you always have to learn. There will always be something that you did not expect. When you have young children, they're more malleable. It's a lot easier to influence them. Once you've raised teenagers, that gives you a whole other skill in terms of listening carefully, understanding that communication kind of comes and goes. The teenagers are like oysters. They open up, and you have that little window of time where you can get some information. And so it teaches you, I think, how to adapt to different individuals, have more empathy, be a better listener also. Making sure that you pay attention to body language, or pay attention to what is not said, and when they fail to engage, there's a reason behind. So I learn all that with my children, and specifically in their teenage years. Not always successfully at home, because I think as a parents we can always reflect back and realize that, I could have done certain things better. But I did learn with this, and I took that to the workplace with me, and I think it was really helpful in that way.
Speaking of the workplace, is there a particular trait that you learned as a parent that you wish more people in the workplace, in the office, understood?
I think the idea of probably that failure is a positive thing. And, I think when you have children, you realize that it's never going to be exactly this perfect, image of what you wanted motherhood to be. And it's all right. You're gonna do something right. You're gonna fail at times, and it's part of the learning journey. And having vulnerability and tolerance about this, and saying, it's okay to make mistake, because you realize in the end, if you get 80% of things right, your kids are going to be great, and they're going to be their own person anyway. And there's understanding this approach to failure, understanding that failure is actually part of the journey, and accepting it, and not feeling the guilt, that comes with it. I think especially as women, we tend to carry that guilt with us, and there's only so much you can do. That's also one of the things with, the similarity between leadership and parenting. There is only, you can only guide them and towards the right direction. But at a point in time, you're going to have to cut the umbilical cord and just hope for the best, that you've prepared your kids or your team members well enough that they're going to make the right decisions.
It's so interesting that we're having this conversation now where we are in the world. I mean, leadership to me anyways is also always a relevant topic, but you can argue that leadership in general has come under a very stringent microscope in the last few years. If you look at what's going on in different parts of the world and different leadership styles that we are now all exposed to. What strikes you most, Valerie, when you see what leadership today entails in some of these examples?
I think the most important will be having a sense of, strong values, being very clear about what you value, and then, being willing to be held accountable to your values. I think too many leaders have they have an objective and they're going down a road and a path, and they're going to leave dead bodies along the way, and it's become acceptable. And I think we on the path where we see this with high profile leaders around the world. And if it's okay for a leader to do that, to lack integrity or to lack values and positive values, then we effectively sending the message that it's okay to behave like this to everybody, not only the people who work around that person, but the people who just can see that person in the news media or at school or at church or in your community. So I think we've gotten to a point where a lot of values are being compromised, and people do not demonstrate the behaviors that support the value. They say one thing, but they certainly do not behave accordingly. And nobody's calling them out. Nobody's calling them out. And we're even rewarding that kind of behavior. So to me, that's worrisome.
And to your earlier point, from a role modeling perspective, when that is the behavior that's being displayed and the young people and everybody else watching it, what are the messages they're supposed to be taking from it, from this individual in a leadership position? Valerie, I'm curious as a leadership consultant, when you go in and support individuals or clients on this topic, like what are some of the trends that you are seeing? What are some of the areas that you're being asked to support?
I think things have sped up quite a bit, and I find that people feel overwhelmed. So because things are changing quickly, and there's we have to deal with globalization today. We have to deal with climate change. We have the insecurity in terms of the economy, politics, just about all over the place. And then you have technology that changes at a speed that is beyond our ability to keep up, right? So I'm seeing a lot of people totally overwhelmed. And I always tell them, I said, you know what? If you keep going like head first into this, it's not going to happen for you. We need to simplify things. And especially when it comes to leadership, one of the motivation for me to write this book was that I've read so many books about leadership. I've talked to so many leaders. And I think sometimes we start having a conversation at a level that is so complicated and complex that we forget the basics. And what I'm trying to do with this book, I'm not reinventing the wheel, right? I'm not bringing an idea that will, rock the whole leadership world on its axis. All I'm saying is there are a bunch of very basic things that we often overlook or we undervalue and underestimate. And why don't we start by taking care of those simple things? And those simple things, you do them at home when you raise your kids. Let's do that at work. People at work, they work because they want money. Of course, we all want to make money, but they also want to be valued. They want to know that they're relevant, they make a difference, and they want to be part of a team. They want a sense of belonging. So let's go back to providing this for people. Let's take care of this, because once you have that, that is the foundation of everything. And there will not be long-term success for you as a leader if you have not established this. And often I find my conversation going back to this. So in a world where things are changing really fast and people feel overwhelmed, for a lot of people, suddenly it's kind of, okay, now I know where to start. I know I'm going to go back to those basic things to try to, build my leadership approach. I'm a tennis player. I love playing tennis. And when you learn how to play tennis, the first things you learn are keep your eyes on the ball, bend your knees, and follow through. And I remember playing tennis, and if my shots were landing, outside the court, or I wasn't, landing my shots the way I wanted to, at some point in time, I would always remind myself, okay, go back to basics. For this one game, just bend your knees, keep your eyes on the ball, follow through. That was, I would go back to those basic things. And sure enough, within a game or two, that's it. I would loosen up. I would feel more confident. Things would come back to me. And I think in leadership is the same thing. Let's go back to taking care of those basic things first of all.
Valerie, can you take us through what the tipping point for you to write Manage Like a Mother was? Was there something in specific that you said to yourself, now's the time that I'm going to take my lived experience, all of my professional experience at work, at home, and I'm going to come up with this book?
Well, I have a 92-year-old mother who lives in France, and she always says, I wish I was 20 and I knew what I know now. And I've heard this so many times that every time I would roll my eyes and go like, oh, here we go again. And then one day it hit me and I realized, you know what? I wish I was 20 and I knew what I know now. And at the same time, I've seen a lot of young leaders, men and women, struggle because of the challenges that they're facing today. And I thought like, well, maybe I can share some of my experience. And that was that moment where when I, okay, well, how am I going to do this? So I do workshop and I do some consulting, but I thought, maybe I can find a relatable way to explain the basic principles of leadership. And the thing that came naturally to me was, being a mom. And the more I thought about it, the connection was just obvious. And I thought, well, that's a simple way. And I worked many years for Disney, and Disney is a storytelling organization. So I thought I need to find a way so people can relate, and that's the power of a story. When I tell a story, and in my book, every chapter starts with a story of situation that happened with my kids. And in the second half of the chapter, I'm going to extract the leadership lessons from that very situation. So the reason why I do this is I'm hoping as people read it, they read the story about the kids, and they will go like, oh, I've had a similar situation with my children. And now I relate. And when you relate, you understand. And when you understand, you retain. And when you retain, you can extract the lessons and you can apply them in your work environment. So that was the process. That's why I'm saying if, when people read the book, they're like, oh, yes, you told this story. Something happened with my kids. And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm looking for, that connection.
That's a wonderful way to sort of describe it. And you're right. There is a tendency to make it a very complex topic very quickly and overwhelm yourself before you've even started. So along those lines, Valerie, any pieces of advice that you could offer to parents listening to or watching this interview about how to make leadership more intentional in the way that they parent?
I think the listening part of it is important. And sometimes I'm being French, I tend to react very quickly. And I've learned over my career to just slow down a little bit and, really think things through before, blurting out something, whether it is an idea or a comment or a suggestion or trying to coach somebody. It's like, okay, let's decide, what am I, is it worth saying, first of all? And if you're going to coach somebody, did I even set the expectation properly in the first place before I coach them? You cannot coach somebody if you haven't done that. You haven't set the expectation properly. So, thinking things through a lot more. Recently I heard, I think it's Warren Buffett said, you can always tell people to go to hell tomorrow. And it's the idea that, sleep on it and think about things and before you do and be more intentional about everything you do generally. And then the other thing is about just keep learning, because there is so much out there. Read, get exposure to different people, different point of view. I found that some solutions in my work from areas I had never in a million years would have suspected that one person or that one industry had the solution for me. So being open to diversity of the world, there's so many people with brilliant ideas, brilliant point of view, young, old, people with different culture, ethnicity, gender, obviously, have just a wealth of information, and not being carried away thinking that, you have all the skills or you have all the resources. All you can do as a leader also is just, really influence people, gather some information from every source that you can find, and then share that. And that, if you can do that, being a hub of ideas and things, and spread it around. And that's what I'm trying to do now in the twilight of my career, trying to share some of my experience, and hopefully some of it will stick. And if I can, it's the idea of being relevant. If I can help somebody, one person, I'll be happy. And that's it. That's what being a leader is. You can be a leader for one, or a leader for 10 million, but any in between is great. And I think you get your value, you get your relevance from that.
Certainly an incredibly important topic, lots of relevant insight. Thank you so much, Valerie Cockrell, author, keynote speaker, leadership consultant, and author of the book, Manage Like a Mother. Really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thanks, Lianne. Thank you very much.